My name is Clara Sutton, and for 18 years, the analytics department at Veridian Dynamics in Raleigh, North Carolina, had been more than just a place of work. It was a second home, a sanctuary of logic and data. I was 38 years old, deeply entrenched in the intricate patterns of numbers that spoke volumes about our company's health and trajectory. My role involved dissecting complex data sets, identifying trends, and presenting actionable insights that often shaped major business decisions. I thrived on the clarity of facts, the precision of calculations, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing my work contribute to the larger success. The department itself was a well-oiled machine, populated by a seasoned group of analysts, many of whom, like me, had dedicated years, even decades, to Veridian. We were a diverse group, some quiet and contemplative, others fiercely intelligent and outspoken, but united by a shared commitment to excellence and a deep understanding of our domain. We respected each other's expertise, often collaborating seamlessly on projects that required varied perspectives. My closest friend in the department was Eleanor Vance, a woman whose brilliance was almost intimidating. She was, by any measurable metric, the absolute top performer in our section, her insights sharper, her analyses more profound, and her efficiency unmatched. Eleanor had an uncanny ability to see beyond the obvious, to unearth hidden connections in the data that others simply missed. She was also fiercely principled, a characteristic I admired deeply, though I sometimes worried it might be a double-edged sword in the corporate world. Life in the analytics department, while demanding, was stable and predictable, a comfortable rhythm of challenges met and problems solved. We were the quiet backbone of Veridian Dynamics, the unsung heroes who ensured decisions were made with data-driven confidence. My personal life was equally ordered, a quiet existence marked by fulfilling work and cherished friendships. I found contentment in the small routines, the morning coffee with Eleanor, the focused hours spent sifting through spreadsheets, the evening walk to clear my head. There was a sense of purpose, a feeling that what I did mattered, and that I was part of a team that truly valued competence and experience. We often joked that our department was the company's brain, constantly processing information, and we took pride in that analogy. Our section was known for its low turnover and high output, a testament to the supportive environment fostered by our long-standing manager, a man who believed in empowering his team. He understood that true expertise came from years of hands-on experience and intellectual curiosity, not just from climbing a corporate ladder. This stable, productive world, however, was about to be utterly shattered. The first tremor of disruption arrived in the form of Brandon Thorne. He was introduced to us as our new supervisor, fresh out of some accelerated leadership program, barely 30 years old, with an air of self-importance that was both startling and immediate. He walked into our department like he owned the place, a young executive in training with a glint in his eye that spoke of boundless ambition and an almost alarming lack of humility. He wasted no time in making his presence felt, convening an all-hands meeting on his very first day, not to observe or learn, but to lay down the law. He spoke with a booming, self-assured voice about revolutionizing our department, about disrupting established norms, and about his unwavering commitment to becoming the youngest executive in Veridian Dynamics history. He prided himself on his supposed innovative ideas, though it quickly became clear he had no practical experience in analytics, no real understanding of the intricate processes we managed daily. He was all buzzwords and bravado, a hollow drum beating loudly. From that initial meeting, it was my way or the highway, his favorite mantra, repeated with a chilling regularity that brooked no discussion or dissent. He seemed determined to dismantle anything that smelled of tradition or established expertise, and he made it clear that any malcontents who questioned his authority would be dealt with swiftly and decisively. It felt like a cold front had swept through our warm, collaborative space, chilling the atmosphere and replacing open dialogue with a palpable tension. The problem, initially, was not mine directly, but it was impossible to ignore, and it quickly became everyone's problem as the shadow of Brandon's presence stretched across the entire department. He set his sights almost immediately on Alina Vance, my brilliant friend, the very heart of our section's productivity. It was an almost instant, visceral dislike on his part. He seemed threatened by her intelligence, her competence, her sheer ability to outperform everyone else combined. I heard him whisper to a colleague once, "She's too outspoken, needs to be put in her place." It was as if her excellence was an affront to his fragile ego, a challenge to his self-proclaimed authority. His campaign against her began subtly, with pointed questions in meetings that implied her work was somehow lacking, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Then it escalated. He started arbitrarily downgrading her performance reviews, fabricating minor issues, twisting facts to paint a picture of inadequacy that simply did not exist. Alina, ever the meticulous one, kept detailed records, cross-referencing everything, but it seemed to make no difference to Brandon. He was driven by a singular, unyielding obsession. The incident that truly ignited the firestorm involved a crucial financial report. Brandon, in an attempt to make the numbers look better for an upcoming quarterly review, brazenly falsified some of the data, manipulating projections to appear more favorable than they actually were. It was a clear violation of company policy, and more importantly, a deeply unethical act that could have serious repercussions if discovered. Alina, in her quiet, principled way, noticed it immediately. During a team meeting where Brandon was presenting the doctored figures, Alina, with her customary calm and respect, gently pointed out the discrepancy. "Brandon," she said, her voice even, "I'm concerned about these projections. They don't align with the raw data we've collected. Falsifying documentation, even inadvertently, could lead to significant issues. I think it would be best if we reverted to the original, accurate figures." The room went silent. Brandon's face, normally a mask of smug assurance, contorted into a furious scowl. He saw her gentle correction not as a helpful intervention, but as an open act of defiance, a public undermining of his authority. From that moment on, it was truly open season on Alina. His campaign of psychological warfare intensified dramatically. He began arbitrarily shifting her schedule, assigning her impossible deadlines, and overloading her with projects designed to fail, all while simultaneously reducing her access to necessary resources. The goal was clear: to sabotage her work product, to make her look incompetent, to break her spirit. He actively tried to isolate her from the rest of the section, subtly discouraging us from collaborating with her, planting seeds of doubt about her character. The most harrowing aspect of his abuse, however, was the public screaming and berating. It became a daily occurrence. Brandon would corner Alina in the open plan office, or even worse, in a team meeting, and launch into a tirade, his voice echoing through the department, his face red with rage. He would scream at her, accuse her of insubordination, incompetence, even disloyalty. He would tear apart her work, often without understanding its complexity, reducing her efforts to nothing. The entire section would fall silent, a collective gasp of discomfort and fear. It was sickening to witness, a public humiliation that stripped Alina of her dignity piece by piece. No matter how hard she worked, how many late nights she pulled, how much success she achieved on projects he couldn't derail, it was never enough. He would move the goalposts, invent new criticisms, always finding fault. It began to feel eerily like spousal abuse, a cycle of escalating torment where Alina became hypervigilant, constantly on edge, trying desperately to anticipate his next attack. He would scream that he didn't want her in the section, that she was a problem, yet when she tried to initiate a transfer, he would flatly refuse, blocking every attempt. It was a cruel, twisted game, and if I can't have you, nobody will mentality that trapped her in an escalating nightmare. Morale in the department plummeted. We started calling Brandon Captain Ahab behind his back because of his obsessive, destructive pursuit of Alina, his white whale. Our section became the Pequod, sailing towards inevitable disaster under his deranged command. When he passed by, some of us would even silently mouth lines from the book, like, "From hell's heart I stab at thee." It was a desperate, dark humor, a way to cope with the absurdity of our situation. We watched, helpless and horrified, as Brandon, like Ahab, seemed intent on sinking his own ship, drowning his own crew, all to satisfy his venomous obsession. The quiet, analytical sanctuary had become a psychological battleground, and Alina, my brilliant friend, was caught in the eye of the storm, slowly being consumed by its destructive force. I felt a knot of dread tightening in my stomach each morning I walked into the office, knowing what fresh torment awaited her, and knowing that standing by and doing nothing was no longer an option. The problem, her problem, was now inextricably linked to my own sense of right and wrong, and my conscience demanded action. The escalating abuse of Alina, the constant public humiliation, the undeniable fact of the falsified documents, all of it gnawed at me. I couldn't stand by and watch my friend be systematically destroyed by an incompetent, vengeful man. Wrong was wrong, and my moral compass screamed for intervention. The decision wasn't easy. I knew the risks involved in challenging someone like Brandon, especially someone so clearly favored by higher-ups. But the alternative, doing nothing, was simply unacceptable. I began to meticulously document everything I witnessed, every public berating, every arbitrary shift in Alina's workload, every instance of Brandon's incompetence or unethical behavior. I recorded dates, times, specific statements, and their impact. It was painstaking work, done in secret, often late at night, fueled by a mixture of anger and a desperate hope for justice. Alina, thankfully, had been doing the same, her notes even more comprehensive than mine, a testament to her thoroughness and her quiet foresight. Her documentation was a treasure trove of evidence, a detailed chronicle of Brandon's reign of terror. Armed with my own notes and Alina's meticulous records, I took the first terrifying step. I wrote a formal complaint, detailing Brandon's pattern of abuse, his arbitrary performance downgrades, his deliberate attempts to sabotage Alina's work, and most crucially, the falsification of official company documents. It was a damning indictment. I sent it upstairs, directly to the Equal Employment Opportunity Department, the company's internal ethics watchdog. Simultaneously, I requested a meeting with Brandon's direct superior, Mr. Henderson, a senior manager known for his no-nonsense approach, though also for his extreme loyalty to his protégés. Walking into Mr. Henderson's office felt like stepping onto a battlefield. I laid out the case calmly, presenting my evidence, explaining the devastating impact Brandon's behavior was having on Alina and the entire department. I focused on the tangible facts, the falsified documents, the undeniable decline in productivity and morale under Brandon's leadership. Mr. Henderson listened, his face impassive, occasionally nodding, but offering no immediate reaction. It was unsettling. After my meeting, Alina had her own meeting with Mr. Henderson, presenting her equally compelling evidence. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought we had made a breakthrough. The immediate consequence of our efforts was a mixed bag. Alina was, to my immense relief, transferred out of Brandon's direct supervision. She moved to a different department, a new role, away from the constant psychological torment. It was a victory of sorts, a reprieve for her, but it also meant she was no longer with us, no longer part of our team, and the department lost its highest performer. It felt like a bandage on a gaping wound. The cost of her peace was her displacement. But the retaliation for my actions was swift and brutal. Brandon, now fully aware of my involvement, turned his obsessive fury directly on me. If Alina had been his white whale, I became his next target, a new Moby Dick to hunt down. My own work life transformed into a mirror image of Alina's nightmare. He began to systematically undermine me, just as he had done with her. My performance reviews, which had always been exemplary, were suddenly peppered with vague criticisms and arbitrary downgrades. He questioned my methods, my judgment, my loyalty. He started shifting my project assignments, giving me tasks that were either incredibly complex with insufficient resources or utterly trivial, designed to make me feel redundant. He would publicly berate me, dissecting my work in front of colleagues, twisting my words, ridiculing my ideas. The subtle microaggressions escalated into open hostility, his voice laced with venom, his eyes burning with a cold, calculated rage. He tried to isolate me, whispering insinuations to other team members, creating an atmosphere of suspicion around me. My phone calls were monitored. My emails seemed to be under scrutiny. The department, already reeling from Alina's departure and Brandon's volatile leadership, became an even more toxic environment. The Pequod was sinking faster now. The constant pressure, the feeling of being watched, the relentless criticism began to take its toll. I found myself becoming hypervigilant, just as Alina had been, every step calculated, every word chosen with agonizing care. My sleep suffered, my appetite vanished, and the joy I once found in my work was replaced by a pervasive dread. It was an insidious, draining process designed to break spirits. I refused to break. I continued my documentation, meticulously recording every instance of Brandon's targeting behavior against me. I sent my own growing file of evidence upstairs again, this time with an even stronger sense of urgency and outrage. I detailed the clear pattern of retaliation, presenting the undeniable proof that Brandon was punishing me for speaking out. This time, the response was quicker, though again, not what I had hoped for. I was informed that I would be transferred. Not Brandon. Me. I was being moved to a different division within Viridian Dynamics, a role that was technically a lateral move but felt like a demotion, a punishment for daring to challenge the established order. It was a bitter pill to swallow. I had risked everything, gone through the agonizing process of confrontation, and the outcome was that I was being removed from the problem, not that the problem was being solved. It felt like a deep, personal failure. I had tried to fight for justice, and I had been displaced, effectively silenced. This was the absolute lowest point. I was out of the analytics department, away from my colleagues, separated from the ongoing struggle. It felt like a defeat, a confirmation that Brandon, despite his glaring incompetence, was untouchable, protected by some unseen force. The department, the place I had called home for so long, was now left entirely to Brandon's whims. From my new, distant vantage point, I watched in despair as the analytics department, my old section, truly began its descent into chaos. Brandon, now free of any experienced personnel who might challenge him, went into what we called hermit mode. He locked himself in his office, shades drawn, door perpetually shut. He emerged only for meetings, where he would deliver grand, empty pronouncements, never engaging with the actual work. His reclusive behavior, combined with his paranoia, led him to undertake a complete reorganization of the department. He systematically moved out or forced out any remaining senior personnel, anyone with institutional knowledge or a history of competence. He wanted to be the sole source of wisdom, the all-knowing and all-seeing leader. To achieve this, he intentionally filled the vacancies with newly recruited, inexperienced individuals, fresh faces straight out of college, who knew nothing of the department's history or its complex processes. These new hires, eager to please and unaware of the toxicity brewing around them, became his pawns, blindly following his directives without question. The result was catastrophic. Productivity collapsed. The quality of the work product, once a point of pride for our department, became frequently inept, riddled with errors, and often delivered late. Complex analyses were botched, crucial reports were delayed, and the once reliable data insights from the analytics department became a running joke across Veridian Dynamics. The very foundation of data-driven decision-making within the company was crumbling because of one man's ego and incompetence. The Pequod was indeed sinking, slowly but surely, taking with it years of built-up expertise and reputation. The senior leadership, including Mr. Henderson, seemed either oblivious or unwilling to intervene, perhaps unwilling to admit their mistake in promoting Brandon, or simply too distant to grasp the full extent of the damage. My frustration festered. I was out, powerless, watching the slow, agonizing death of a department I had dedicated nearly 2 decades of my life to. Brandon Thorne, the incompetent boss baby, was destroying everything, and there seemed to be nothing I or anyone else could do about it. The problem had grown from a personal vendetta against a leaner to a full-blown organizational disaster, and I, the one who tried to stop it, was now on the sidelines, feeling utterly defeated. The final act of Brandon Thorne's self-destruction began with a whisper, then a growing rumble that reached even my newly isolated office. Desperate to resurrect his falling star, to prove his worth to the upper echelons of Veridian Dynamics, Brandon did something truly audacious and recklessly foolish. He brazenly stole a large, high-profile project, a critical initiative with company-wide implications, from a different branch office. This project had been carefully cultivated, months in the making, and was meant to be handled by a specialized team with proven expertise. Brandon, in his typical arrogance, believed he could simply reassign it to his own struggling department and claim the credit for its successful completion. It was a gambit born of desperation, a last-ditch effort to polish his tarnished image. He assigned this massive, intricate project to his current favorite newbie, a well-meaning but utterly overwhelmed young analyst with almost no experience in projects of this magnitude. It was an act of gross negligence, setting the young person up for inevitable failure. The newbie, naturally, destroyed it. The project, already delicate and complex, spiraled into a catastrophic mess. Data was mismanaged, deadlines were missed, critical components were overlooked, and the entire initiative veered wildly off course. The young analyst, terrified of Brandon's wrath, kept quiet, trying desperately to salvage what they could, but it was a losing battle. The most damning detail was this. Brandon Thorne, in his blind confidence and perhaps his pathological need for control, signed off on everything. Every flawed report, every missed milestone, every incorrect analysis. His signature was on it, rubber stamping the disaster, taking full ownership of the impending catastrophe. Everyone left in the department, either too new to understand the gravity of the situation or too afraid of Brandon's temper, said nothing. They watched the train wreck unfold, paralyzed by fear and despair. Even though I was no longer in the analytics department, Veridian Dynamics wasn't so vast that information couldn't travel. A few of us, the old guard who had experienced Brandon's destructive leadership firsthand, still maintained quiet lines of communication. My former colleagues, those who endured his ongoing reign, managed to discreetly get wind of the unfolding project disaster. They reached out to me, cautious whispers exchanged over encrypted messaging apps, vague references to the major project, and the inevitable implosion. I felt a jolt of something I hadn't felt in a long time, a flicker of hope, but also a surge of renewed apprehension. Was this my moment? Could this be the tipping point? Or would it just be another failure, another instance of Brandon slipping through the cracks while I risked everything again? The internal debate raged within me. My last attempt to intervene had resulted in my own transfer, my isolation from the very problem I tried to solve. Was it worth the risk again? What if it backfired even worse this time? The thought of being completely blacklisted, of having my career at Veridian Dynamics utterly ruined, filled me with a cold dread. But then I thought of Alina, of the systematic cruelty she endured, of the quiet desperation in her eyes. I thought of the once-proud analytics department, now a shell of its former self, its reputation in tatters, its vital function compromised. I thought of Brandon Thorne, smug and unrepentant, continuing his destructive path, protected by his perceived invincibility. And then I remembered the falsified documents, the blatant disregard for ethics that had started this whole nightmare. This wasn't just about a project failing. It was about a pattern of gross incompetence, unethical behavior, and systematic abuse of power. This was bigger than my own personal safety now. This was about justice for Alina, for our department, for the integrity of Veridian Dynamics itself. I had to act. My decision made, I began to move with a quiet, steely resolve. I reached out to my trusted contacts, those few remaining colleagues who had suffered under Brandon or had witnessed his destructive path. I didn't ask them to directly provide evidence, knowing the immense risk they faced. Instead, I carefully extracted information, piecing together the narrative of the stolen project's failure. I learned the precise details of the project's original scope, the branch it was stolen from, the new analyst assigned to it, and crucially, every instance where Brandon had signed off on the disastrous progress reports. It was like collecting fragments of a shattered mirror, slowly fitting them together to reveal a complete, damning image. I meticulously cross-referenced the original project plans with the flawed outputs, highlighting every discrepancy, every missed requirement, every error that could be traced directly back to Brandon's approval. I correlated the dates of his sign-offs with the timeline of the project's destruction. This time, I didn't go through Mr. Henderson or even the Equal Employment Opportunity Department directly. Those channels had proven ineffective in truly addressing the root cause. This time, I went higher. I compiled all the evidence, a thick dossier of incompetence and negligence, buttressed by the original documentation of the falsified reports and Aliner's own meticulous notes from her torment. I then carefully and anonymously leaked the entire package to the Inspector General for the organization, a powerful internal oversight body with the authority to investigate serious misconduct and systemic failures at the highest levels. I made sure my identity was untraceable, using a secure, off-network connection and a burner email address. I wanted the evidence to speak for itself, without being dismissed as the complaint of a disgruntled former employee. My submission wasn't just about the project. It connected the dots, demonstrating a clear, unbroken line from the initial falsified documents and Aliner's abuse, through the systematic purging of experienced staff, to the final, catastrophic mismanagement of this critical company-wide initiative. It painted a picture of a single individual Brandon Thorne, systematically dismantling a functional department and jeopardizing the company's core operations, all for the sake of his own misguided ambition and inflated ego. The wait was agonizing. Days turned into weeks, each one filled with a simmering anxiety. I checked company news, internal memos, subtle shifts in the corporate atmosphere, searching for any sign that my action had had an effect. Then, slowly, the whispers started. Rumors of a major internal investigation into the analytics department. Talk of high-level meetings, hushed tones, and unusual visits from the Inspector General's office. The internal grapevine, so often useless, now hummed with activity. The final collapse was swift and decisive, a poetic unraveling of Brandon's carefully constructed world. The Inspector General's investigation was thorough and unrelenting. The evidence I provided, combined with other internal data, and, as I later heard, the persistent, quiet efforts of Aliner Vance, who had apparently continued to share her experiences and documentation with key contacts even after her transfer, proved to be overwhelming. Brandon Thorne's entire charade of competence and leadership crumbled under the weight of irrefutable facts. He was removed from the managerial program, stripped of his supervisor title, and demoted. His cherished ambition of becoming the youngest executive in Viridian Dynamics history, the very cornerstone of his identity and his abusive behavior, was not just delayed, but utterly shattered. His career, the one he had so recklessly pursued at the expense of others, was effectively kneecapped. He was shipped to a remote branch office, a desolate, dead-end outpost in a far-flung corner of the company, a place where ambition went to die and where his limited skill set would be utterly irrelevant. He would never climb the corporate ladder again. His entire professional trajectory had been irrevocably altered, not by a grand corporate restructuring, but by his own destructive hubris. The resolution, for me, was a profound sense of fulfillment. I didn't get my old job back in the analytics department, nor did I particularly want it, not in its current state. My new role, initially a consolation prize, had actually turned out to be a surprisingly good fit, offering new challenges and a more supportive environment. I had found a quiet peace in knowing that I had done the right thing, that justice, however belated, had been served. The analytics department, slowly, began the process of healing. A new manager, someone with actual experience and a collaborative spirit, was brought in. The senior personnel who had been displaced were cautiously invited back, and a concerted effort was made to rebuild the team and restore its reputation. It was a long road, but the cancerous presence of Brandon Thorne had been excised. And then came the twist, a final, satisfying note of poetic justice. About a year after Brandon's demotion and exile, I was at a company-wide retreat, a rare gathering of various department leads. I found myself in conversation with a former colleague, someone who had known Brandon well. They casually mentioned that Brandon's new boss at that remote office was none other than Mr. Henderson. My heart skipped a beat. Mr. Henderson, the same senior manager who had been Brandon's initial patron, who had been slow to act on our initial complaints, had, in the wake of the Inspector General's damning report, suffered his own quiet demotion. He hadn't been fired, but he had been moved to oversee the very same desolate remote office where Brandon had been banished. The irony was exquisite. Brandon Thorne, who had boasted about becoming the youngest executive, was now reporting to a man whose career had also been derailed, a man who undoubtedly held Brandon personally responsible for his own downfall. I pictured Mr. Henderson, a man who valued competence and results above all else, now forced to directly manage the very epitome of incompetence and ego, with no escape. Brandon Thorne, who had locked himself away from his team, hiding from accountability, would now spend his days locked in a professional purgatory, directly accountable to a man who despised him, eternally reminded of the career he had destroyed, not just his own, but Mr. Henderson's as well. Had Brandon simply locked himself in his office from day one and never come out, never interfered with the team, never falsified documents, he might have achieved his cherished executive position, failing upward through sheer invisibility. Instead, his active, destructive ambition became his undoing, and his personal hell was a demotion that placed him under the very person he had once sought to impress, now his eternal, grudging supervisor in a barren landscape of broken dreams. The Moby Dick had finally, truly, sunk Captain Ahab's ship and dragged him down to the crushing depths alongside it.